Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Retuning Your Firm. And today is Friday, the 8th of April, 2022, and this is episode 71. And I'm delighted to welcome back today some people who've been on the show in previous episodes, and we've all got some interesting new ideas and insights to share with us, one of whom is actually even writing a book about it, and we'll come to that a little bit later. So what are today's themes? I've called it Ukraine Special number 3, and we had two very, I think, almost quite poignant episode specials 1 and 2, which if you haven't watched the videos, please do. But I thought that what we're really talking about here is not the short-term conflict, but what does this change of mindset, world mindset almost, mean for our sector? And so what are the challenges? What are the new challenges which emerge as a result of that change in the way that the world now operates? So we'll be looking at people, various groups of people, those who work in large firms, those who work in smaller firms, those who work in full-time roles, those who work in flexible roles. So we're covering various types of opportunities. And then we're looking at some lessons from sport. And we're not just going to look at the obvious ones of winning and strength, but some of the more sustainable messages and stamina. So really looking forward to hearing from Catherine on that. So over to me. So welcome today. I'm Richard Chaplin, as you know, and I'm the founder and chief executive of the Managing Partners Forum, and it's still really pleased to be with you today. So who have we got on today? Well, first of all, and I will be highlighting them as I go through their names, I would like to welcome Steve Ingham. And Steve is the group chief executive of Page Group. And he's talking about some of the new challenges facing some of the large professional firms. Now, those of you who don't know Page Group, it's it's dominant, I think is probably the right word. But anyway, it's a very, very major player in the world of recruitment. And he would argue, I think, that a lot of his competitors are actually you guys in the terms of hiring in-house resource people. But he's looking at what are some of the new challenges facing him, but also his firm and the type of firm he is as a large professional firm. I know they don't have a Russia office. They did 7 or 8 years ago, but what are some of the issues which are likely to face the larger firms, of which obviously he's a great example. Our next panelist is Denis-Smith. And Dana is the founder and chief executive of Obelisk Support. And for those who don't know Obelisk Support, it's really almost like one of the pioneers in the whole area of flexible working in the legal space. Dana is a lawyer, was a solicitor at Linklaters, Magic Circle, as we were talking about in the green room a minute ago. And where did that come from? And she's talking about are there going to be any changes facing both consultants and clients in terms of the new challenges when they're working in a flexible working context. Now, again, we'll see. It may be early to say, but I think it'll be really interesting to hear what she has to say on that particular aspect. And our third panelist is Catherine Baker, and she is the founder of Sport and Beyond. I don't think I need to say much more about what she does, but she was a tennis star who then trained as Linklaters as well. We've got 2 Linklaters today. It's quite interesting. We discovered in the green room. And she has been working as a coach and with a lot of professional firms, having trained with one. And what are the sort of lessons from sport in the whole area of sustaining long-term performance? And the key word there is sustaining, I suspect. We all have a mindset that as we get older, we can't do certain things. Is that always the case? Let's find out. So that's Catherine. So I'm looking forward to what you have to say, Catherine. Our final panelist is Meirion Jones. And he's director of Tongues in Trees, which I always love that. Apparently it's Shakespeare, but this is all the babble of world that we hear around about us. And I think it's a really lovely way of expressing what he does. And he's looking very much at the challenges for individual advisors. Now, individual advisors could be himself as an SME and sole trader, if you like, or it could be some of the individual, particularly fee earners that he's working with as an executive coach. And what are some of those new challenges facing those individual advisors? Because it's all very well if the firm charges off in one direction, but if the people don't go with it, then you've definitely got a problem. So that's our amazing panel for today, and really looking forward to working with them. In terms of myself, as I mentioned, I'm the founder and chief executive of the Managing Partners Forum, which anyone who's been on the show before knows already, and it's my pleasure to be your host for today. Before we go on to the poll section, just some little bit of forum news for you. Lots and lots of people, and we're talking hundreds, are watching the videos from past shows, so please don't miss out. The other one that is going really interestingly is our Mentor Match program. And if you recall, what that was all about was some of the more senior people saying it'd be really nice if some of our junior people could actually be mentored by somebody from a different organization, because that removes some of the politics. And what we wanted to do was to really see if you could actually match people for us. So I saw it's almost like recruitment, but it's not really. But anyway, because for like 6 months, you don't have quite the same number of checks that you need to carry out. So we've created this secure, confidential place. And what's quite interesting is of the first batch of matches that the system, it's an algorithm, came up with, 60% of those have now actually moved into mentorships, which is a pretty high percentage. I suspect if Steve could place 60% of his candidates, he wouldn't be able to count the money. But unfortunately, this is a free one. So, but it's one that I think is very important. So what we're doing is we're launching a structured training program now, because some of the mentors say, well, I'm a novice, but I'd like to help. And actually, sometimes a novice, as we know in the world of sport, isn't actually the best way to approach the next competition. Second area we're going to mention is the Innovation Summit. And what we're doing there is going to be quite fun. We're doing a mock board design sprint on Meirion templates and from the Fast Track Innovation Guide. So if you haven't signed up for that, then do look out for that. It's on all over LinkedIn at the moment and on the 18th of May. And then the last one is do check out the report that we put out with VacancySoft on business management hiring trends by UK law firms. And I'm told by accountancy firms it's very similar. But actually what that is giving is a very interesting insight as to exactly where law firms are hiring business management people. And we're talking thousands of them at the moment. It's as many sort of what I call law roles as business management roles, roughly at the same volume. So that I think is quite new and quite different. So let's move on now. We're talking about feedback from UK government. And as you know, I'm going to ask you to do a poll in a minute. And it was quite interesting when I looked at the polls because, you know, they do obviously influence things. But let's just run through what we found last time. If you recall, we did a quarterly sector trends tracker. And the things that were up on the top of the of the partner discussions, marketing had been really quite high throughout the pandemic. Now it's operational efficiency and it's sort of risk management. I guess the risk management picks up some of the challenges that you're seeing. Most of the ways that people are achieving goals, Meirion will be pleased to see, are around people-based activities, team building, communication, and the like, not about your ability to come up with an amazing plan. The thing that's getting in the way, again, Steve will know much more about this than most, is employee turnover, a very, very high constraint. But what's quite interesting is that the poor economic outlook and political uncertainty, which pretty much disappeared 6 months ago, have now revived. They're now beginning to sort of re-emerge as constraints in a way they weren't before. Activity levels, new workflow, headcount growth remain incredibly bullish. Nobody's looking to contract, like nobody, 0%, which is certainly wasn't the case during the pandemic when it was completely the other way around and most people were expecting to contract. About 18% are now looking to increase their office space. That number was 0 for about the last 2 years. It's now beginning to happen. Now that's probably a combination of growth and as someone was saying, collaboration space does actually take quite a lot of space. People working from home, there's a bit of a shift from what we could see about 3 months ago, last quarter, around half the time was kind of seen as being the norm. That's shifting now to closer to around a quarter. And this one kind of weird, I thought was quite strange, but only 12% were reporting productivity gains from remote working. Now that number was 50% 6 months ago. So has that changed? Is that a sort of an outlier? And again, only 30% of key clients are seen to be on track for post-COVID success. I mean, the firms, well, 60% of us are on track, but if your clients are aren't on track, where's the money going to come from downstream? Because government has obviously pumped massive amount of money into the economy, which has kept the clients able to pay the bills, which has been great for some professional firms, best years ever last year. So that's what came out of the quarterly trends tracker. Just looking at some of those in quickly, 2 or 3 quick charts. If you can't see the numbers, don't worry about it. The blue is expansion, the red is contraction. And what that's telling me is that it's got consistently 0 in terms of contraction along the red, but that wasn't the case. Go back sort of a couple of years now. In terms of what are the things that actually help, and again, I don't think this is probably going to be very visible to most people, but the top one is communicating effectively. That's light blue. Getting the best from your team is the orange, is the one, purple one below that. Making change happen is green. Understanding, motivating others is the red one, and only making decisions comes in 5th. So it's all about people, basically. That's what really matters. In terms of the office space, the purple at the top is the people who are looking to expand, pretty much non-existent. This goes back about 18 months now, a bit more, probably 2 years actually. The blue is the people who want 20% less space. That was about half of you, and that's all, it's relatively around about 20% of you. And then the big chunk of that olive chunk is about the same. And that kind of is, I think, where most people are about the same now as they were. And how much of your time are people likely to be working from home? I've done this at 3 dates. The olive one would have been at 1st of October, so 6 months ago. And that's over to the right, which says more working at home. The red was the January one, and then the blue is the one from 2 weeks ago. So there's a movement, as you can see. I'm sorry, it's a little bit clear, but you can see the slides later, don't worry. But there's definitely a movement without needing to read anything, which takes you into the left, which means that more time working in the office. So there's a shift. We'll see whether that's the case in 3 months' time. So let's move on to today's poll. I wanted to do employer brand. Now, employer brand is really interesting because we had a meeting of our finance group a couple of days ago, and they were talking about how do we make the office more attractive for people to come and work in it. And I said, guys, that's a marketing challenge, isn't it? And I said, and is your employer brand in line with your external client brand? And they kind of looked at me, what planet have you come from, Richard? Because finance people don't always think that way. And actually, Meirion's a marketing person, as we know well. There is actually a very important need to ensure those two are in alignment, put it that way. So what are we going to be covering? And it's one that I think you did about 18 months ago. So I've done it once before. And Simon Barrow of some of our associates is the one who actually came up with the question. So thank him again. So what are the important elements in the employment experience provided by your firm? How do you track your ability? How do you track and assess your ability as an employer? How do you know how people feel working for your firm? What carries weight at partner meetings? Who's actually responsible for what we're calling an employer brand management system? Sorry about the acronym, I can't fit it on the slide. What are barriers that are getting in the way of achieving an optimal one? And then what are the values and behaviors of your leaders, which absolutely are likely to influence the case? First question, if you recall, was what are the, excuse me, believe are the most important elements in the employer experience. Now, what's quite interesting was that I actually included at the bottom flexible working arrangements, and I hadn't included that 18 months ago, and yet that's picked up half the votes. Colleagues and culture is the one that comes through very, very strongly. So that's the one that I think 80, nearly 90% of you include that in your top 3. So that's good. What are the ones that are being tracked on a regular basis to actually assess your ability as an employer? Voluntary exits, that's fine. Involuntary exits, not very many. Offers you make, not very many. People filled by existing people versus external, hardly at all. Sickness absence is the biggest. And some people aren't doing any of them at all. So no tracking at all, which seems a bit strange, but there you go. Moving on to the number question 3, how do you feel about working for the firm? How do you find out how people feel about working for it? And certainly last time we did that, it was exit interviews. And guess what? Exit interviews are still number 1. So somebody who's decided to leave you is going to influence how you then organize your firm. Well, that's probably a bit late, is my observation. But anyway, we're all entitled to our opinions. In terms of which firm, in your firm, which areas normally carry the most weight during partner discussions? And again, that pretty much reinforces what we've seen before. But today's poll, marketing's up there. You'll be pleased to see, Meirion, it was a bit lower than last time we did this one. So marketing has now come through at the top. So who knows, that's maybe today's audience, but marketing really matters. So how satisfied are you that people in employment issues, including your internal and external reputation as an employer, receive the necessary understanding, leadership, measurement, urgency, and coherence? Well, very satisfied, 20%. Quite satisfied, 60%, 20% not yet satisfied. Nobody thinks they have a problem. I suspect we're all being a little bit positive about life, put it that way. Do you believe your career site messages are distinctive and compelling? Nobody says they're crystal clear. That's a bit worrying. Mostly clear, about 2/3, partially clear, 1/3. Nobody says they're not at all clear, but again, not exactly a perfect scorecard there. Do you have a policy that sets out how you're managing your employer brand? Well, half of you think some of you say it covers most aspects. Nobody says it covers all aspects. and a big chunk of 20% saying we haven't got one, we might write it, and another nearly half of you haven't got one. So there's obviously an area that could be focused on there. Who should be responsible? Firm-wide leader obviously comes through the most, highest there. And luckily, no one says no one should have any responsibility for it. What's getting in the way? And the one that's most getting in the way is the difficulty of measuring and demonstrating the benefits of an employee brand measurement system. So maybe there's a marketing challenge there that might be worth looking into. And given the need of leaders to show that values and behaviors matter, what are we saying here? Well, that's not too bad on the whole. 80% accessible, 73% transparent, 73% employees valued as highly as other stakeholders. So those are all, I think, very positive messages. So, and I will now invite our first guest to come and talk to us a little bit about the whole area of what I call the new challenges facing large professional firms. And it's Steve Ingham, who's the Group Chief Executive of Page Group. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for the introduction. Yeah, so a little bit, very briefly about myself. I've been at Page, or Michael Page, as you may know us, for 37 years, and I joined when the business was 240 people, and I'm glad to say we're 8,240 people now. So I've seen quite a lot of growth. And I can thank, I'm sure, some of you for that. So thank you. I'm also pleased to say that I went through some of the data that Richard sent to us, and on page 5, it said that employee turnover was the biggest constraint to your growth. So clearly a very big topic at the moment. I've been running the business for 17 years, and during that time, I also had a near fatal accident. So what you can't tell, because I probably look like a typical CEO of a FTSE 200 as I sit here, but I'm in a wheelchair and I'm a paraplegic. So a little bit different, and possibly that gives me a slightly different twist to the way I think as well. Remember, people leave leaders, and so how you lead your organization probably reflects your staff turnover. So maybe people should think about that as well. And I'm pleased to say Page Group's staff turnover at the moment is at a record low. And I don't think many companies at the moment can necessarily boast that. It's expensive, staff attrition. It's inconvenient, and it impacts in many ways. Staff morale, because naturally other staff that are working for you get stretched when there's a lot of gaps. Naturally, it reflects on probably client relationships, if you're under-resourced and so on. And of course, staff exit interviews, as Richard said, have their use, I'm sure. But people on the whole are generally polite and probably won't say the real reasons when they're interviewed, I'm afraid to say. But one thing's for sure, they tell us the real reasons when they then meet us. And so from our perspective, it's quite interesting what we hear. And it's a lot of reasons. You know, the way that I'm led, the values of my manager, of the business, their lack of focus on diversity and inclusivity, and certainly equity with that, the lack of focus on ESG generally, sustainability particularly, the lack of purpose in the organization, their inflexibility towards the way they work, the sort of offices they've got, they're not attractive to go back to. And they're not accessible to my particular needs, remembering that 20% of the population, or 18% to be more accurate, are disabled in some way, either invisible or visible. So that's me jumping on the soapbox and back off again. Let's think about it for a moment, and it's all very obvious. First of all, COVID's been a great period of reflection. And I'm sure we can all think of examples amongst our friends, those that have decided they live in the wrong place, the wrong type of house, the garden's too small, the wrong job, the wrong partner even. And I'm sure we've all got stories as people have reflected on COVID. Certainly a lot of people have reflected, am I working for the right organization? Am I in the right sector doing the right type of job? And they're acting on it. And so, you know, lots of other reasons, for sure. The barrier to moving jobs, which people forget, has also radically reduced. You know, the days when we had 20 days holiday and I was trying to arrange people to go to an assessment center where you had a 1 in 6 chance of getting a job and you had to take the entire day off to do it, which either meant taking it as holiday, so that's 5% of your holiday gone, or you lie. Neither are comfortable. Nowadays, it's a video at 6 o'clock tonight. You know, and you can have a first, second, and third interview probably in the next week, and you've landed a job. So you're going to probably consider more options. And if you are mildly unhappy at work, well, what sort of commitment are you making to go for a few video interviews and explore the market out there and see what's available and see what salaries are being offered, what other companies have got in terms of employer branding and so on. So the speed of hiring is obviously quicker and so on. And they'll certainly consider jobs perhaps otherwise they wouldn't have considered. This is a worldwide issue. We're in 37 markets. Richard has highlighted there probably one of my better management decisions. About 10 years ago, we pulled out of Russia. So yes, but we are in 37 other geographies. And the UK actually only represents 14% of the group. So, you know, we've got a good flavor, but this is literally happening everywhere. We're performing at record levels in every single market. And it is something that clients have to be very aware of and necessarily, I don't think, are focused as much as they could be. Candidate shortages exist in most areas, and yet clients, particularly in-house resourcing teams, tend to, and this isn't everyone, so don't get sensitive, but tend to fish in the same pools, which is strange, isn't it, really? So the tried and tested methods don't work, but you keep doing it rather than actually thinking, okay, what's important to my employees, such as diversity, for example. Maybe we should be exploring all those different pools. When was the last time I interviewed somebody who was obviously disabled, for example? Again, back on the soapbox, but how many times have you interviewed somebody in a wheelchair or somebody who had a physical disability? Well, unless you're fishing in different pools, you're not going to be. And so, you know, maybe that's requires a change of approach. Now I'm getting waved at. So I've probably highlighted a lot of things. My time is up, but I'm sure I'll happily answer questions later. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. And I'm only just trying to make sure we have space for the other panelists to share their words of wisdom as well. No need to sorry at all. It was brilliant. Thank you. Our next guest is Denis-Smith. And Dana is the founder and chief executive of Obelisk Support. And she is working in a parallel world to some way with Steve. I know that Steve obviously does a lot of various types of recruitment, but flexible working arrangements are ones that she is very much focused on and looking at it from the perspective of both consultants and clients. So over to you, Dana.
Oh, thank you so much. So I set up Obelisk Support about 11 years ago, and actually it was all about the other pool that Steve mentioned, the one nobody wanted to fish in. So my focus at the beginning was to bring back city lawyers, highly qualified women that were being written off because they were mothers, and everybody that we tried to place them and get to work with them basically decided that they couldn't accommodate the flexibility. They couldn't put up with the school run, and therefore they were basically forced out of the labor market. So our number one priority was to bring them back. So really my business, which is also thriving because there is a candidate shortage and there is a lot of demand in the market at the moment, has always been around, if you like, communities that were disenfranchised by the existing model. I was very keen to understand their needs first. So I started with the consultant population and really trying to not look at what was the differentiator, but to try to keep them connected to the legal sector and find opportunities for them. Because to me, I think one of the biggest opportunities that has come from the pandemic is the rise of flexible work. We've had such a market global level experiment that has not reduced the productivity and actually has not reduced performance of the firms. In fact, we're seeing law firms have amazing results. So the idea of remote working and allowing people to live their life around work seems to be something we should really embrace and push ahead in the future. Really, I feel very strongly about it. But my business started from the consultant end, people that wanted to work flexibly, to control the hours they worked, to control the location from which they worked. So most of the people we had from the very beginning were home-based consultants who understood how to work around all their other commitments. For me, the role of my business was to make sure that we were able to create a kind of non-friction between the client requirements and the consultant requirements, to make sure that whatever flexibility meant for the consultant lawyers could be translated to fit the flexibility appetite of the client. But I completely agree with Steve. I remember very clearly putting forward disabled lawyers before the pandemic, and nobody wanted to recruit them because they were in a wheelchair, they had mobility challenges, and they were not basically even considered. There was this requirement of being in one place above all other skills. And I felt very strongly, maybe because I was an employment lawyer, that we cannot continue to treat talent in this way for the longer term. Now, obviously the pandemic helped. So luckily, a lot of our people that were disabled are now in roles. So that makes me really, really happy, because suddenly their talent was visible, not their lack of mobility. So we used to focus, I think, on the wrong metrics, the wrong kind of talent qualities. And they included, are you willing to come into an office? Are you willing to be in a certain place in a certain time? And luckily now with Zoom and all the kind of technology that we have seen, people are being able to show themselves for the best qualities they have, which are technical ability and knowing their stuff. And everything else is a secondary aspect in how they're being assessed. We shouldn't have had this kind of shortage of talent to allow good people to be seen irrespective of the other protected characteristics. But it looks like only with the help of the pandemic, we could start to focus our attention on the right things. On the client side, so I think me, consultants are having a great time now, because really it's an opportunity. They're able to, if you like, shape the workplace, because there is such a lack of talent in the market. We've got a really tight market, and everybody with a different kind of requirements are able to negotiate them in. And I hope that will make for a permanent change in the way we really reimagine the workplace. On the client side, especially law firm side, I think there's a lot to be, desired. They are, I think, not understanding the depth of change that we have undergone. And if they're not waking up, I'm not sure their, amazing results will continue to come. If I look at my own business, people do not want to work in law firms. Often they have bad memories, and they think, will they really understand me? Will they really accommodate my needs and how I want to work? So really, there's a lot of education around cultural shifts in the law firm culture to really embrace flexibility truly. And that involves really listening from the ground up, how you shape your policies, your working methods, and how you set people up for success. So I think the general counsel community and the in-house community is way better. They have definitely understood flexibility, because a lot of people, that was their first stop when they didn't want to work in a law firm. They just run away into a corporate environment where they could leave at 5 and pick up their kids. So flexible work and having shorter hours were very much the reasons why they left. So they understand they're more accommodating, and that's why my business is continuing to succeed. You would think, remote working, flexible working, everybody knows about it. But actually, we're still having to educate. We're still championing flexibility and remote working. And that should even not be a requirement anymore. And I think we will see the push from the in-house community, the push from the consultant community. And I'm hoping that eventually law firms realize that the time for the old ways of working is really up, as is mine, I believe, because Richard is waving at me too.
All good, but I've got 2 more great panelists, so I just want to make sure that they have a chance to share their insights. So our third guest today is Catherine Baker, and Catherine is the founder of Sport and Beyond. And as I said, from after a career in tennis, she then became a lawyer, worked for Linklaters, and then after a period of PSL, has started up a consultancy, a coaching consultancy, looking at lessons from sport and focusing very much on sustaining long-term performance. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Richard, and good morning, everybody. Now, leadership can be hard. It can be relentless. And with the challenges that everyone's been facing with the pandemic and then the fallout from Ukraine, it can feel like you're on a constant treadmill. So I'm going to share a couple of pieces of research this morning from the world of tennis that can shed some light on how you can build your stamina muscle. It can help you understand how you can stay the distance and perform consistently over the long term. Both pieces of research are based on tennis, and they come from a chap called Dr. Jim Loehr, who's a performance psychologist who's been working in this space for decades. The first piece of research looks at a very simple way in which you can sustain your physical resilience on a daily basis. Now, back at the turn of the century, sounds quite a long time ago now, doesn't it? Jim was sort of curious because there were a small group of top tennis players who were consistently winning the big tournaments. Now, those of you who know your sport will know that at the top level, the margins are quite small, particularly in a sport like tennis. The difference in technical ability between number 100 in the world and number 1 is actually very small. And there was a small number of tennis players who were consistently winning the big tournaments. We're talking about the Steffi Grafs, the Pete Sampras at that time. So Jim decided he wanted to find out why, and he got together hours and hours of videotape, which he spent hours and hours looking through, and he got really annoyed because he couldn't see what they were doing differently until he started looking at what they were doing when they weren't playing tennis. What they were doing in the 25 seconds between points and the 90 seconds at the game changeovers. And he noticed they were using that time very differently from the vast majority of players. They were using that time to switch off, to turn away from the court, to reset, to remove from their mind what had happened, so that when they turned back and faced the court, they were capable, ready, alert for the next point. And he actually, when he picked this observation up from the videos, put heart monitors on some of the players to assess this. He could actually see the physiological changes in the players who were able to do this. Now, of course, you'll see, those of you that watch tennis on telly, every single professional tennis player does this. They turn their backs to the court, they get their towel, they rub their faces, and they turn back. Now, we all know the benefits of nutrition, of sleep, of taking long holidays, etc., in making sure that we can sustain our performance. But this sheds some really interesting light in some of the things that we can actually do on a daily basis, trying to give ourselves what are called micro breaks. Whether it is standing up between Zoom calls for 2 minutes and doing some deep breathing, whether it is taking your dog out for a quick run in the garden, going to make a cup of tea, whatever it is, we can all build in a significant number of micro breaks during our day that can really help drive our physical resilience. The second piece of research relates to self-talk. Now, self-talk is a very big, prevalent concept in sport, and it always amazes me that it's not more widely talked about in leadership. Jim Loehr, again, a while ago, again we're talking quite a few years ago, decided that he wanted to understand the impact of self-talk. And he asked a small group of select players to vocalize their self-talk over a week's play. Now, during that play, they were training, practicing, doing training matches, and he asked them all to actually vocalize out loud their self-talk, and he recorded it. He then condensed down the hours of self-talk of these particular players and got them in the room together. And for each player, he showed a clip of 5 minutes of their condensed down self-talk. And as you will probably imagine, it was all pretty negative and pretty derogatory. Oh, that was a rubbish forehand. I'm so bad at tennis. Why am I even on the court? I'm having an awful day today. I'm just terrible. Now, the players were amazed to hear that this was what their self-talk was. It was a real jolt to their systems. And Jim used this to get them to start thinking about how they could turn around that self-talk for it to be much more positive. I didn't quite follow through on that forehand. I know I'm a good player. I just need to work a bit harder. They're doing this particular tactic. I need to adapt. So he got them all to start thinking about and then practicing how they could turn around their self-talk. And I think it's something that's very important in leadership, not least because through the pandemic, the person that we've all been spending more time talking to is ourselves rather than anybody else. Be conscious and be aware of the conversations that you're having with yourself, and try and make sure that that self-talk is positive and helpful and can sustain your performance rather than being negative and something which takes away from your performance. I'll be sharing these lessons and a whole load of other research and stories and some fresh stories in a book that's coming out next year called Stay the Distance, the lessons from sport that leaders have been missing. And thanks, Richard, for giving me an opportunity to just share these two today.
I can't wait to read it. Looking forward to that. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Our last guest, and by no means last, is Meirion Jones. I can't pronounce it Welsh style, he can. And he is the director of Tongues in Trees, which is almost, I suppose, not the self-talk, it's almost the opposite. It's all the tongues all around you telling you things, and are you listening to them or not? And he's talking about what's going on for the individual advisor, and the people he coaches, but also himself as an SME. So over to you, Meirion.
Thanks very much, Richard. And Shakespeare's point about tongues in trees is that we're surrounded by wisdom. There's always know-how and knowledge waiting to be plucked out. I was really interested in what Catherine was saying just now, because I'm sitting here, the last of these 4 speakers, and thinking, oh, these are so great. There's so much interesting information. They're such good speakers. What the heck am I going to have to say to follow up on that? So perhaps I should be asking for Catherine's advice going forward. So I'm going to be looking at this from a slightly different perspective. There's been a lot of discussion about how, because of hybrid working and working from home and so on, that the office life is intruding on the home life, that the boundaries are decaying. One of my coaching clients a couple of days ago said that his house is no longer a refuge. He feels now that it's just an extension of the office, and he feels all at sea. He doesn't feel as if he has the resilience and the strength to be able to treat the home as a refuge, as a place of security. So there's a blurring that way, but it also seems to me the blurring is going the other way too. A lot of the coaching I do, of course, is online. A lot of the training I do is online, in person too, but a lot of it online still. And most of the people I work with now seem to be dressing like me. In other words, like glorified tramps. If I were to stand up, you would see that I'm just wearing holy tracksuit bottoms, because it doesn't matter anymore. And this kind of growing informality, I think, is going both ways. And I think it's terrific, because what it means is that there can be more honesty, more candor, more authenticity, and all of that is lovely. But putting that aside for a moment, there are also other things which I'm starting to see coming into the working environment from the home life. And some of these things are really, in my experience, very serious. Bit of background information: my wife is a supervisor for an education authority on educational support for long-term medical absences for children. And she and her colleagues are describing an absolute epidemic post-pandemic of children suffering from a range of disabilities. Stephen interestingly said there are 18% of people with disabilities either hidden or seen. There's a huge amount of unseen disability and mental disability, mental illnesses growing up, quite aside from the physical ones. And this is an epidemic which I do not believe that this country is yet equipped to start to contemplate. Now, bringing it more specifically to professional services, if I'm working as a senior partner in a firm, if I'm trying to juggle lots of different things in my life, if my work life is intruding into my home life and vice versa, I am struggling greatly with these pressures. Catherine talked about the stamina muscle, talked about building resilience, and that is marvelous. But in my experience, most of the people who are experiencing this don't have the support, don't have the infrastructure in place in their firms to help them to do so. I have in mind a couple of my current coaching clients, and I'm not going to go into detail, of course, because this is confidential, but they are grappling with enormous pan-jurisdictional issues. One has responsibility for Central and Eastern Europe. Well, given the current circumstances with Ukraine, just imagine how difficult that is for them to be managing. On top of that, they have kids who have been affected by 2 years of lockdown. At their most plastic developmental stage of psychological growth, they have had this affective trauma. One of those children is evidencing certain other psychological issues and so on. And this is putting an enormous burden on this individual. And in my experience and anecdotal exchanges with colleagues and associates, this is by no means a unique example. So I was very interested when Dana earlier said how important it is that firms start to listen from the ground up. This has to be systemic. I think that firms have to move on to effectively a war footing to develop a much more proactive approach to positive psychology, to support, to being aware of all the challenges that their partners, their associates, everyone in the organizations are facing. Because if they don't, I think that we're going to be facing some really quite challenging times ahead. There's been the Great Resignation, of course, and that is continuing. But my suspicion is that's going to be a relatively minor phenomenon compared to what might be coming down the pike. So in terms of how to deal with it, I mean, from a personal standpoint, I never go into a coaching encounter now assuming that the object of the discussion, building a business plan, creating better leadership, being better as a salesperson, is going to be the meaningful issue. I go in assuming that that is the tip of the iceberg, that there are other issues that often they're waiting to talk about, to reflect upon, simply to be heard about, and to go at it from that standpoint, to allow their reality to emerge, and then compassionately to give them the kinds of tools that they can work with to manage that. Richard's just put his finger up. I would just go back to some of the great things that Catherine said, some of the great things that Dana and Steve had said here. It's cool coming together in a really lovely holistic mix, and it would be terrific to stay for another hour or two and really explore these in depth. But anyway, Richard, back to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, all of you. I think there's been a really interesting set of insights that you've shared around the new challenges. What I'll do now, and so we're on the for the panel session, is I'll start off with Steve. And just Steve, asked you a question around, you talked about what you're seeing in terms of a lot of activity and a lot of people moving, etc. But are you seeing the client side changing? Are you seeing, picking up some of Meirion's points, that actually there is a need to change the way that they approach potential candidates, and it's not good enough just to invite the HR person to come up with a new slogan or something?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think clients are realizing the problem and reacting as you'd expect. So, for example, I mean, it's been mentioned there, the way that we work. I think people have changed very radically from I want everyone back into the office to actually, if I do that, probably not everyone's going to come. It's going to create problems, and they're looking at how they allow people to work, how they achieve the maximum productivity with people working at home, how they adjust their offices to make them more conducive to coming back. I mean, it's fairly obvious. If you want to tempt people back into the office, make your offices tempting. And if you're just going to carry on with the same old offices, well, people are probably going to go, do you know what? It's a long commute. I don't really want to commute. I feel unsafe, etc., etc. So I won't. But and there are ways of fixing that. And I think clients, to varying degrees, are reacting. And the ones that win the war for talent will be the ones that probably react the most. And just having a strap line, sure as hell won't work. So you know, there has to be a lot more meaningful than that. And I'll just, because Meirion mentioned it there, authenticity. And it is a classic, isn't it? People talk about great leaders are authentic. And just one example, a lot of people are facing stress with the last couple of years and leadership in general. And yet, a lot of leaders will never admit to something like a mental health challenge. As far as I'm aware, in the FTSE 200, I'm the only one that actually declares a disability. But logistically, that's unlikely. So somebody out there is probably being inauthentic because they're just hiding it. Now, anyone would know that if you're hiding something that's true about yourself, you're not authentic. So if we want to be authentic leaders, then we've got to actually be honest about ourselves. We are vulnerable. We're the same as everybody else. And leadership, as I said right at the beginning, is why people leave jobs.
There's a very good friend of mine, Gareth Jones, who sadly drowned in Brighton, and he said the key is to be authentic with skill, to be yourself with skill, and it's not good enough just to be whatever you think looks good, but you actually got to do it skillfully. So thank you for that. Very interesting insight. Moving on to Dana now. Just sort of looking, you were talking about how, if you like, the flexible working world was kind of when you started up something that was almost like a sort of a sideline, and now all of a sudden actually it's becoming very mainstream. Where do you see it going?
I can tell you where I like it to go rather than where I think there's a whole bunch in the market that are in a kind of suspended animation. They think it's a kind of new lockdown of we've got to put up with this new way of working, as opposed to really understanding it's a shift that is here to stay. So I'm concerned to some degree around the new shape of flexible work, because I think there's an increasing gap almost between what organizations think is flexible work and how it should work, and what people want from their organizations. So, and I'm not seeing enough education in the middle to really expand the understanding. I think at the end of the day, a lot of firms have investments that involve real estate and various things, and actually changing how they are laying out and tempting people into their offices requires investment and costs and really a structural change. And are they really prepared to put the money there? And or are they just thinking this too shall pass, So I like to see flexibility really staying in, because I think we need the talent to continue to be active. We don't have enough good people, really. I mean, it's like a limited ecosystem. It's harder and harder to train people. There's fewer and fewer training places. So it's not as if we can just say to somebody, well, sorry, you're a mum, we don't want you, or you have a disability, we don't want you. We really need to put all the talent into the market to be more productive and innovative. So I like to say that it's here to stay, but I do feel there's an increasing gap between what people want and what organizations think is right.
And of course, there's no such thing as an organization, only people. So are we talking here about the leaders? Or are we talking about the people who are actually hiring people? Or is it just a sort of, this is the way we think it might be in our culture? And I'm not sure I have an answer to that, but bringing in Catherine now, if I may. And obviously, really two fascinating insights from your forthcoming book about sustaining long-term performance. One area that I find quite interesting, I guess it's because I'm going to be 70 this year, is the whole issue of ageism, because I kind of noticed that I'm probably more energetic than most people of my age. I think that's one way of putting it. And am I doing something special, or is that just, are there some things that others could do to sustain that energy into those later years?
I think, what you're really getting at there is mindset. And actually, there's a very good book, not my book, but by someone else called David Robson, that's just come out, called The Expectation Effect, which for those of you who are interested in your own mindset and how that can drive both your longevity, but also your recovery from circumstances, diseases, etc. It's a science-backed book and it's very good. In fact, I remember an old piece of research where they got some students in a room, and one lot of students, they used words that were old sounding, and they watched them walk along the corridor afterwards, and they were all walking more slowly, and they were stooped because they'd listened to all these words that were linked to old age. And the other group of students they had in another room, where the group of words was all about being young and bouncy and energetic, and the students kind of skipped down the corridor. So there's no doubt that the mindset that you bring, and it's very relevant to leadership as well, to what you do, the mindset that you bring to your role has a big impact on how you perform. And I think just like elite athletes, when they go to perform, they focus on their mindset and they check in with themselves about where that mindset is. I think leaders should be doing the same as they go into their work life. And I'm very pleased to hear that you're feeling energetic, Richard, and looking after yourself.
I'm always energetic. That's just me. I couldn't be any other way, I think. Meirion, just picking up your last point really around how when you're entering a new client engagement, how you're pretty sure that the reason that that's underlying the request is probably not the one that's set out on the paper, if you know what I mean. How do you go at uncovering what the real issue is?
Listen, because sooner or later the truth will out, and most of the time people aren't listened to. As Stephen Covey said, we listen with the intent of replying, not with the intent of understanding. So my main role is to understand, and that means sitting and listening intently and allowing the subject, that is to say the coachee, to process and to reflect and to make the connections and to make the self-discoveries.
Fascinating. Well, we've sort of got, now we're just kind of into the last minute or two. So I'm just going to ask you all, if I may, Stephen, starting with you just quickly, what's today's session? Are there any particular insights that you've taken away from today's session?
Yeah, what Catherine just said there, I thought was very good. How we not only lead and behave, but also how we bounce back. Like you, Richard, I'm not quite 70, but I have just turned 60. And you're right, it is about mindset. And as to how we approach life and leadership and so on. And the average age, I think, of somebody at Page is probably about 29. So if I behave like a 60-year-old, I'm not sure I'd be leading them very well. So maybe that's my mindset.
Dana, what's yours from today?
I think it's okay to be bold, out and bold when you lead.
Is that bold or bold?
Haha, well, good one, but not that one. Courageous.
Okay. Catherine, what have you learned from today's session?
I think picking up on what everyone is saying, and also the poll, actually, the importance of the conditions in which you are working. We all know that one set of athletes can perform incredibly differently depending on the conditions in which they're operating, their coach, the culture, etc. So I think that's been reinforced with all the panelists and the poll today. So it's been really interesting for me to hear that. Thank you.
We're at 10 o'clock, so the last word goes to Meirion on this occasion. What's your
Thank you, Richard.
takeaway?
Well, I've also just turned 60, and going back to this negative self-talk, I must condition myself not to think that I already have one foot in the grave.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we're now moving to gallery. So I'd like to thank our fantastic panel today. I'd like to thank Steve for interrupting his busy job as a group chief executive of FTSE 200 to come and share some great insights. And I think your positive attitude towards your disability is something that is remarkable. So thank you for that. I'd like to thank Dana for her kind of seeing so many years ago that this flexible working was such an important bit and missing bit, and how actually now it's becoming mainstream, and who knows, could even go beyond that. But I'd like to thank Catherine for reminding us that we can sometimes learn from other sectors, in this case, the world of sport. I think we can be very insular as a professional services. We always say the definition of the lawyer is somebody who could win the Nobel Prize if they had time to read the manual, except nobody's written one. And so thank you for Catherine for that insight. And then Meirion, as always, tongues in trees, listening. Leaders don't listen enough, I think, and we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and people kind of forget that ratio at times, I think. So thank you to a fantastic panel. We're back in a couple of weeks with another show, and in the meantime, I wish you all a very positive and productive day. Bye for now.
Thank you.